Hi everyone, this is Rachel, the project coordinator for our Early Psychosis Learning Collaborative. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box using this setting feature as all panelists and attendees. Next slide, please. I just wanted to review a few housekeeping items with you all before we begin. Participant microphones will be muted at entry, and you'll be able to unmute them during the discussion portion. During the presentation, if you have any technical difficulties or questions about the topic, please use the chat box setting as all panelists and attendees. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing at a later time on the MHTTC website. And those attending today's live event will be eligible to request a certificate, and more information about this will be in a post-webinar follow-up email. And to reach us after the webinar, you can email newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. And this slide shows our disclaimer for MHTTC. Next slide, please. And the MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. That language is strengths-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, healing-centered trauma responsive, inviting to individuals participating in their own journeys, person first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, and understandable, and consistent with our actions, policies, and products. And with that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Raquel Meshlam-Gately for introductions.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. As Rachel said, my name is Raquel Meshlam-Gately. I am a psychologist from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, involved with the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. It is so nice to see so many attendees today, as well as broad representation across several disciplines and community groups, from clinicians to researchers to people with lived experience and so many others. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is part of an important series of initiatives we've launched through the New England MHTTC to address culturally competent care for people with serious mental illness. We will be regularly updating these initiatives on our website, and we'd welcome any suggestions for other resources that we can provide. As I'm sure you're all aware, cultural factors have a range of implications for mental health practice, including access to care, treatment-seeking patterns, lack of trust and stigma, the nature of the therapeutic relationship, and issues of racism and discrimination. These considerations may be particularly heightened for those with psychosis. And as a field, we're tasked with creating equal, culturally sensitive services for all. So to that end, I am delighted to welcome my colleague, Dr. Luis Sandoval, to address this important topic with a particular emphasis on the Hispanic Latinx community today, both through his presentation and any questions that you might have in the end. Feel free to type those questions, comments, and ideas into the chat box as you think of them, and Dr. Sandoval will respond to them right after he finishes his presentation. I just want to give a very brief introduction for Dr. Sandoval. He is an experienced bilingual and bicultural scholar, researcher, and clinician who is trained in multiple psychotherapy modalities and has applied his vast experience in both Spanish and English across diverse multicultural populations and settings over the past 18 years in the United States and Mexico. Currently, Dr. Sandoval is a clinical researcher in the Department of Public Psychiatry at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And in addition to leading his own research projects, Dr. Sandoval has collaborated with multiple studies funded by the NIH, PCORI, NASA, and various private foundations. His research has focused on digital psychiatry and human-computer interactions to improve symptoms in schizophrenia and mood disorders, cognitive remediation in psychotic disorders, and mental health innovation to improve outcomes in underrepresented groups and communities. Today, he is going to share his expertise on treating psychosis in the Hispanic Latinx community, including discussion of 3 cases that challenge stereotypes consistently found in the clinical care of individuals from this community. So, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to turn things over to Dr. Sandoval.
Hi, thank you so much, Raquel. Welcome, everybody. Wow, what an audience! To be honest, I think the last time that I see more than 100 people was probably my wedding. So nice. I hope I can, I can do the same to perform well and explain the situation. Uh, so one of the things that I wanna disclose immediately is that yes, I'm Hispanic. Yes, I'm Latino. And a lot of people, look at me and they think I'm Arab or Portuguese or so all over the world. So it's very hard for the majority of the people to know where my ethnicity is just based on my phenotype, but it's kind of obvious once I start speaking. So my accent definitely is not for a native citizen here. And I want to say that because that has given me a fantastic opportunity to be almost like an in disguise in the mental health system because I can be in front of a client who is from India and it will relate immediately to me because just of my face. Or I can be in front of a Lebanese descendant or Portuguese or, Bangladesh, Mexican, Puerto Rico, Brazilian. And, and I will try to share my experience with all of you about what does that mean to be a Hispanic clinician, but also what are the things that I have seen, working with this particular population, my population in Mexico as well as in the US. I also want to disclose that I want to share real cases. Um, uh, those are tough. If you guys are, feel sad, that's fine. If you guys have questions, that's also fine. And just, if you have any questions or comments, just please feel free to raise it or put a thumbs up and share that comment. I will try to address that. I have a lot of content, but it will be richer if, as long as, I go and I talk and then you interrupt me and say, I have this particular question, I will take a minute to talk about it as we go. All right, so without further ado, I want to start. Again, my name is Luis Sandoval. I'm a clinician, I'm a researcher, and, and I think one of the unique aspects of my training is that I start my training in Mexico, treating Mexicans, and then I moved to the US to have my second training, and then I realized the differences between treating Hispanic people in the US or treating Mexicans in the U.S. and and the difference between treating Mexicans in Mexico, and it's a huge difference, um, and we will talk about that. So, who are we? I think that's the first question. Uh, there is a lot of going on between the terms Latino, Hispanic, Latinx. If we want to go just by a purist definition, Hispanic or Hispania uh, are the countries they're from the Iberian Peninsula. So basically, if you want to call someone Hispanic, should be from Spain, Portugal, or Gibraltar. The Latinos, on the other hand, refers to the Latin, to the language. And if we use the language, then we need to include not only Spain, but also we need to include France, Italy, and Portugal, and of course the majority of the countries in South America. And then we have a new term, which is the Latinx, which basically coincides with a US movement to introduce gender neutral nouns and pronouns. And as you know, the research that I found is that only used by 3% of the US Latinos. I think this is going to change pretty soon, the term Latinx. But when you when you talk to your patients, your clients, and you ask them, can you define yourself? I think depends of the region. If they're from Texas or California or Chicago, they will have a different answers. But but we need to be aware of that, because if you have someone from Spain in your office and you say, oh, you're Hispanic, the definition is correct, but very, very likely that that particular person will say, no, no, I'm from Spain or I'm from Europe. Don't, I'm not Hispanic or Latino. And that happens the same with someone from South America. If you say, oh, you're Hispanic, he will say, well, sure. And, in the US, you can call me Hispanic, or you can call me Latino, but I'm from, from Chile or from Guatemala. So it is nice to have a label per se, but I will recommend that we need to start, breaking those stereotypes, and instead of saying that you're Latino, you're Hispanic, or Latinx, how do you define? I think it would be richer and better for the treatment to say, so where are you coming from? What are your roots? Uh, and if they say, Guatemalan or Peruvian, Brazilian, then try to refer them from their own country. No, so challenging the phenotypes. So it's important to talk about Latin America, North and Central America. The American continent has 33 countries and 15 dependent territories. And the data changes. Sometimes you will find 35 and 20 dependent territories, sometimes 40 and 10. And that tells you that when you're trying to treat Latinos or Hispanic or Latinx in the US, you already can tell that it's a mess and it's going to be complicated. It's not a straightforward situation. So, as I said, Latinos are not a monolithic culture, and don't treat them as one. Just think about this. You have, just follow these, numbers. You have 33 countries. Yes, but that doesn't mean we share not even 60 or 70% of the cultural things. But not because I think the only thing that we can share once they're in the US is the immigration component. That, yeah, we're immigrant, but that doesn't mean we share the other components like culture, language, slang, food, religion, customs, folk, etc. So when you are in your office, again, I will encourage forget about those stereotypes and just try to be empathetic and say, okay, what are you from? And try to refer to a cultural base instead of a monolithical culture component. So we have a question here. Vanessa, can you help me to pull the question, please? So what is the typical skin color of Latin American? If you get it right, it's awesome. If you get it wrong, it's even more awesome. There is no right or wrong. So I want you just to think about your own experience. When you go to the supermarket, when you see your patients, when you see your clients, when you're interacting in the high schools, elementary schools, what is the typical skin color of Latin America? Okay, I want to give, I think once we reach to maybe 85%, we'll talk about that. Again, what will be the typical skin color of Latin America? 10 more seconds. Okay, almost to the 40, almost to the 80%, almost. Come on, one more vote, one more vote. There you go, 80%. So it's very interesting. The answers were brown, 32%, unknown, 51%, white, 17%, and no blacks in Latin America. I want to throw something to the audience. Why no blacks? What happened? And please feel free to unmute yourselves. Just say hi, how are you, and just gonna give an opinion. Again, this is just for teaching. This is just to enrich our conversation or dialogue between clinicians. What happened? No blacks? Anyone?
Hi, this is Julie from Austin, Texas.
Great.
Hi. I think there are. I think that kind of surprises me because I know, especially like in Colombia, there are. It's all shades whenever in my opinion. I'm ready to be corrected, but it seems like all shades applies to Latin America.
Yes. I'm sorry that I have 118 windows, so I don't know who said that, but I will trust and say sure. Anyone else? Great comment. I will make a comment on that. A follow up.
Hi, this is Gardenia, and I had a comment about that. So I kind of perceive the question to be what my typical experience is when I am encountering other Latinos. And unfortunately, I don't think I've had as many encounters in the US with Black Latinos. And so I know that there are a multitude of different skin tones and backgrounds, but here in the area of Washington, that's not my typical experience.
Okay, great. All right. For the people who say white, can you just share a little bit of experience why you say white? The typical skin color of Latin Americans are white. What are they talking about? Where are they from? What is experience with the white Latinos?
I said white because I have a family member who is very, very white. She almost looks Irish, white skin, red hair. That's her, I guess in the northern parts of Mexico, that's not uncommon. I also had a friend in school who was from Brazil. She was white. She spoke Portuguese.
Great.
That's why I said white, because I don't know.
Great.
My experience.
So you're relating
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Yeah, my name is Jacqueline. I also say there's white and it comes from Spain. Like I'm from Dominican Republic. And when they, colonized Dominican Republic, I think that's why we have we don't have as many white people in the Dominican Republic, but that's what I believe, when we say white.
Jacqueline, let me ask you a direct question to you. Is Dominican Republic part of Latin America?
Yes.
Of course, right? So I think this is a great discussion, and I don't want to make any assumptions or interpretation, but I feel that I need to say something here. Let me just take the pull up. If you go to Argentina is heavily influenced by Italians and Germans, especially after the World War I and World War II. They're pretty light skinned. But if you have black hair, they will call them blacks. You can even see that, that particular phrase in one of the most touching speeches from Eva Perón, when she says, mis cabecitas negras, which basically, she was on the balcony giving the speech, and then cabecitas means, little head, my dear, the translation will be my dear black little head people. If you go to Cuba, and if you go to Argentina, there's light skin, black hair, they can call him black. If you go to Cuba and you have black hair, they can call them black. Irish people, when they have, a little bit of curly hair and they have black hair, they call it black Irish. So they're black, they're brown, they're yellow, they're olive, they're cinnamon, they're latte, they're all kind of skin colors. Personally, my aunt, for my mother's side, she's super light skin, blue eyes. Myself, I look from Pakistan. I look from India. And guess what? We have the same grandmother. We have the same food. We have the same thing. But just because of the light skin, people think they're different. And therefore, they're going to treat us different. So you think about this when you try to address Hispanic, Latinx, Latinos, go beyond the phenotypes, go beyond. It can be, you will be surprised what will you find. So just to give a little bit of background, again, 33 countries. And what are their roots? We have Aztecs, Mayans, Incas, Moche, Chibcha, Mapuche, just to mention some, right? Mexico by itself has more than 10, 15. That's the pre-Columbian era. Post-Columbian era, we have the Spanish, the British, the Italians, the French, the Africans, the German. Now we have some people from India too in some of the Caribbean communities. So when you're talking about the Latino, you're basically talking about the entire world, not only from the old world, but also from the new world. And that's going to continue. And that's going to continue not only if you go and say, you know what, it's too expensive to live in Boston. I want to live in Puerto Rico. I want to live in Guatemala. And I want to continue my treatment. You will see those differences in skin color and culture all over, right? I see a couple of questions here. These are many songs speak about the history of Constitution America. No le pega la negra. Of course, yes. There's a lot of songs, poems, art that talks about the blacks, the browns, the Creoles, etc. in our countries. Just to tease you a little bit, well, and this is something that I learned when I was living in the US. It seems like everybody's an expert in phenotypes. So let's connect to that part. And can you tell me the difference? Which one is the Hispanic here? The one on the left, the one on the right? I'm talking about the guys here. Who's the Hispanic one here?
They're all Hispanic to me.
Good. Who else? Anyone else?
I would say the one on the left because he's more expressive.
So this one is the Latino, and this one is?
Not Latino.
No Latino. What about this woman?
I'd say Latino.
Which one? The ones and the twos? Which one?
The one.
Okay, so you're right. The ones are Latinos, but look at the similarities. This is I believe Charlie Garcia, a prominent rock star in Argentina. And this is a filmmaker from the US. You probably know him. Starts with Tim. No? Correct. This is a very prominent actress in Mexico, and she is a singer. If you see, what's the difference? The hairstyle, the expression. To be honest, I would say don't even go there. Don't go to the assumptions. We're just challenging the phenotype, the stereotype. If you see them in the airport, I would probably, if None of them speak, or some of them are, they're native in speaking English. You will know the difference unless they disclose that. And once they disclose it, unfortunately or fortunately, depends of your character, it will kick in all the stereotypes and all the beliefs, and you will be like, whoa. And you will see that all the time. When you just imagine this person speaking perfect English without accent and says, I'm from Argentina, it's like, whoa. Yeah, but you have a little bit of an accent, or there's always a doubt why they're so proficient, why they're so blended, why they look like the typical white American. Again, if you don't challenge this since the beginning, it's going to be pretty hard down the road to challenge, how to assess and capture symptoms, diagnosis, etc., etc. All right, there is another one. Can you tell me where these people are?
Brazil?
Where? The left or the right?
I'm thinking they're doing, so the left.
The
But
left is Brazil.
anywhere.
Okay.
Right is
Anyone
New
else?
Orleans.
It's New Orleans. Yes.
Oh.
Yes. See, but because we always, the Latinos always party, the samba, Brazil. Sure, that's also New Orleans. No. So again, yes, the one in the bottom there is definitely from Brazil, Sambódromo. But if you put it out, in a different context, you will never think it's like, oh, Brazilian versus people in Mardi Gras, right? So again, challenge this component. But sadly, and this is very sadly, these are the typical stereotypes that we tend to see in the US. The typical gang member, the cholo, the drug dealer, the guy from El Salvador, or the indigenous, very poor, or the opposite, right? We have the super sexy, suave Latinos, the queens of beauty. Yeah, but it's gonna be a mix in your clinics. It depends where you are. As Raquel mentioned, I've been fortunate to work at NASA, and you don't see a lot of Latinos. And when you see one, like the astronaut, Jesus, people will say, like, are you sure you're the Latino here? Are you sure you're not a mechanic? Or no, yeah. Because being Latino has nothing to do with intelligence, has nothing to do with aptitudes. It has to do with a particular place where you were born, right? So what are the other stereotypes here? All these people, you're probably familiar. They're the other kind of Hispanic and Latinos. Can you recognize some of them? Wonder Woman, for example, from the 1970s, Hispanic heritage. Louis C.K., Spanish heritage. This is guys from SNL, Spanish. Football player, this is a swimmer, a famous Lucky, I believe. I think one of the parents is from Latin America. So you see the difference? Huge difference, guys. And we have to recognize that these people might be in our office one day, or it might be the parent of one of our clients, or the husband or the cousin, etc., etc. I see a lot of comments. I want to just pause. Top is Mardi Gras, NOLA. Yes, San Francisco Carnival. Astra is Mexican. Correct. I will continue. So now we need to challenge the language and the stereotype. Again, there's more than 30 countries in Latin America and Caribbean. Do you think we speak all the same language? The stereotype will be like, yeah, that's Spanish. Well, I think we have a poll question. Can you pull the question, please? After Mexico, what is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world? Spain, United States, Chile, Argentina. Maybe none of the above. Denise says, I feel this is a tricky question. Do you want to say why, Denise? I have heard you're from Brazil. Do you speak Spanish? Again, let's try to go to the 80%, guys. Okay, good. All right. The answer is the United States.
Yay, I got it right.
Yes, there is a huge Spanish-speaking population in the United States. People will think Spain, but remember, Spain has Catalonia and they speak Catalan. Has Galicia, they speak, I don't know how to say that in English, but definitely Galician. In Argentina, yes, they have their language and their sub-languages there too. So why this is important? Again, because in the United States, there are a lot of monolingual Spanish speaking. So keep that in mind. So going back to the question, remember, we have 35 countries plus province. So, and territories, I'm sorry. So what are the official languages and dialects? We have Spanish, we have Portuguese, like Brazil, we have English, we have French, we have Guarani, we have Dutch, we have Haitian Creole, just official languages. Example of the dialects, we have the Yamara, Nahuatl, Quechua, Papiamento, Hindi, etc. And you say, well, yeah, but those are very, pre-Hispanic, very, rooted in the country dialects. I don't think we will see patients in our clinic in Washington or Boston. No, you will see them here. As an example, in Massachusetts, there is a huge population of Maya Quiche, and they don't even speak Spanish. They speak Quiche, and they're from Guatemala. I learned that when I moved here. I was like very, very cocky, saying, I speak Spanish, let's do this. And when I saw my first patient from Guatemala, I immediately assumed they speak Spanish, of course, with the differences, and we couldn't understand each other because they speak Quiche, and I was just able to speak a regular Spanish. So Latinos in the U.S., and I will try to go, quick on this because it's more about, general information, and I want to really go into the cases. This one basically shows, yes, there is a lot of Hispanic people in the United States. In 2000, 35 millions, 2017, 58 millions. Where are the Latinos in the US? Well, the majority of the people is concentrated in California with 26%, 26%. Then it's Texas, then we have Florida. But, and then we're talking about the big metropolitan areas, Hispanic, of course, in Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Houston, California, Chicago, Dallas Forward, Phoenix, San Antonio, San Diego. But the reality, and I think that will be hopefully at this point no brainer, the reality is that Latinos are everywhere, everywhere. You can go to a very, very small community here in Massachusetts, in Western Mass, and you will find some Hispanic community. They might not speak English, they might speak Portuguese, but they're part of the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community. Another important factors about the Hispanics is definitely the educational component. As you can tell, if we aggregate all the Hispanics, then we have at least a 59% of high school, 25% of bachelor's, and 2 years of degree from college. But this is great. I mean, that will be the second generation, third generation. But what about the US born Hispanics? Then we're talking about 47%, 33%, and 20%. and foreign-born 71%, 17%, and 12%. This is a very important fact, guys, especially for the ones who are doing research and the ones who are doing clinical work, because the majority of the interventions, CBT for psychosis, DBT for psychosis, psychoanalysis, if you practice that in the Spanish population, usually the language is too high, meaning we need to lower the language to make it more simple for at least a second or third year of high school, meaning like 9, 7, between 7 to 8 grade. If you are able to provide therapy around that language, not only people with low education will be able to understand, but also people with higher education will understand. So this is a very important component in terms of, Hispanic and mental health. The economic status of Hispanic, even though they have 2-3 jobs full time, and they have kids, and they try to do their best, they are in a huge risk for poverty. All Hispanics counts for 19%, US born 20%, foreign 18%, which is pretty sad. The economic characteristics, then look at the median annual income is 45,000. That might be a decent salary if you live in one of the border cities between the US and Mexico, like Hidalgo, Texas, or La Jolla, Texas. But 45,000 in Massachusetts, for example, or Washington, or Chicago, New York, LA, that's a problem. Definitely a problem. And look at the other data. 20% of the US born and 31% of the foreign born are with pretty bad salaries. I have a couple of questions here. Link to the webinar. Okay, I will continue. The other important part, which I think this is more related to the healthcare, is the insurance. Here is a beautiful data by Pew Research. If you are from Honduras, 35% will have the insurance. Guatemalans, 33%, Salvadorians, 34%, Mexicans, 20%, Ecuadorians, 17%, Peruvians, 15%, Argentinians, 12%, Dominicans, 12%, Panamanians, 11%. So it's pretty bad, the without health insurance. If you see, the Spaniards are usually from Europe, they have the lowest, and that might be a cultural thing, because they usually have a higher income, and two, in Spain they have a socialized healthcare, so they know better how to navigate the system. But look, you're from Honduras, you have 35% of the population without insurance, or Mexicans, 20%. And you say, well, it's not that bad, but remember, the majority, or the most prominent group, Hispanic group in the US, are from Mexico. So if we're talking about 1 million, 20% of them without insurance, that's a lot. Now multiply that for the real numbers, you will see the full picture. Language spoken among the US immigrants. As I told you, 42% speak monolingual Spanish. And that monolingual Spanish can range from first grade all the way to a PhD level in Spanish. So if we want to do a clinical work, we have to be able to narrow or to tailor the language according to the level of monolingual Spanish speaking client. All right, challenging the diagnosis and the stereotype. Again, Latinos are 17.8% of the US population, and 50% of them have mental health diagnosis, mental health Americans. Just gonna throw a couple of questions for you guys. If we have 50 million of Latinos or Hispanic in the US, and 17% of the population, and 15 of them have a mental diagnosis, how many clinicians do you think we need to have in our workforce? Do we have enough? And let's pretend that we're, including nurses, social workers, OT, psychiatrists, mental health providers, psychologists, you name it. The reality is, if you just pick depression, which is one of the most popular, if you pick depression and we put all the Hispanic people that have depression on one line, and then we have all the providers on a second line, we don't have enough. And this is just for treating depression. Can you imagine now the comorbidity with anxiety, psychosis, eating disorders, substance abuse? We need definitely more people, not only in general in the workforce, but we need more people that know how to deliver these interventions in Spanish, Portuguese, French, Creole, etc., etc. Since this presentation is about psychosis, I just want to point out, according to the APA, again, this is just one population of providers. These are the numbers who they think, well, they reported the frequency of providing services with schizophrenia spectrum and others. So never we have a 32%, rarely 38%, occasionally 20%, frequently 6.5, and very frequent 2.9. So that means that no more than 500 people are trained and are, they have the skills to provide psychotherapy in schizophrenia. Now, imagine that schizophrenia in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Creole, in Papiamento, in Quechua. The numbers are just non-existent, basically. And I think this is important to remember, not only from a personal training, but also that can definitely create a new workforce where we can talk to our managers, supervisors, directors to say, we need more training on this, or we need to create a network support, because now we have a new wave, of Portuguese speaking clinicians, and 5 of them, they have schizophrenia. What do we do? Where should we refer them? And we need to create that thing. Now, let's talk about a little bit of the schizophrenia. There are five domains related to psychosis, and I will try to simplify it into three main areas. Psychosis, mostly schizophrenia, they're the positive symptoms, the negative symptoms, and very recently, it was put into the big picture that there is a neuro and social cognitive deficits. So what are the positive symptoms? Those are the typical hallucinations and delusions. What are the negative symptoms? Usually are related to emotional expression, like that they're more sad, they don't want to do anything, low motivation. Some of them are the disorganized thinking and speech, but the neuro and social cognition. The neurocognition is the inability to think fast, to process information fast, to react fast, to memorize things, to pay attention, and that brings a lot of problems. I have seen patients where when I ask them, "What do you have for breakfast?" and they will take between 15 to 20 minutes just to give me a simple answer, such as cereal. 15 to 20 minutes, that's a lot. And it's not because of the voices, or it's because of they're not motivated to talk to me. It's because they need to go to that part of the brain where the information is, stored, the memory, and they can't have access as simple as they used to. That takes time, that takes effort. In terms of the social cognition, is basically the capacity to recognize your own emotions, while at the same time you're able to recognize emotions in other people and to provide, a good understanding of what's happening. A typical example, if Paco, a patient with some of the symptoms of schizophrenia, hallucinations, and deficit in social cognition, gives a cake to his brother Pedro, and Pedro says, Paco, your cake is to die for. One of the typical responses will be like, oh, I'm sorry, Pedro, I didn't want to kill you, right? So the social component was not there. He couldn't understand that that was a compliment. And you will see that quite often in psychosis. And it can be, I realize that it can be, kind of intuitive for me because I've been doing this for so much time, but not everybody knows about this neuro and social cognitive and how that is connected to positive and negative symptoms in patients with psychosis spectrum disorders. Schizophrenia, you have to be aware of this. I would say that the four main diagnoses in schizophrenia. One is the brief psychotic disorder, and and just the quick key component is brief. That means for a short period that ranges from 1 day, 1 hour if you want, to 30 days. A schizophrenic form, it's from 1 month to 6 months. Schizoaffective, as the word says, affective, affection, it has to come with a component of a mood component. And the big one, or the most severe one, is schizophrenia, that ranges from 6 months to years and years. If you don't know these differences, we can label whether misdiagnose or overdiagnose our clients, and that can change their lives forever. If you think having a label of mental health is tough, try to give a label of mental health of schizophrenia to a 22-year-old from Guatemala who speaks Maya Quichén. The family will completely be in tears, and then the culture kicks in, and that might be a situation where they either will, send it to the next mountain, send it to a different neighborhood, don't talk to them, or it can be the other component, which is this is a bless, and I'm happy that we have someone touched by God. That can change dramatically. So now I want to talk about what I think is the most important part of the presentation, which are the clinical cases. And again, it's just going to be aware. I just want to tell you that some of the cases are pretty frustrating. They're not pleasant. The majority of them have a happy ending because we found the resources, because there were things that we were able to do on site. But hopefully these clinical cases can resonate in your experience, and hopefully we can engage in a dialogue about what are the things that you guys experience, what are the things that we can do, and what are the things that we wish that we can do, but they're not possible because X, Y, and Z. I want to give a little bit of pause because I have a couple of chat. It says, I already have a habit children with fluent speak Spanish. Okay, good. Question chat from, I think, but Vanessa, if you can, if you see one of the questions, just unmute yourself and try to ask me the question so I can go over. Otherwise, I have plenty comments here. So I will continue, guys. So the first case, I call it encapsulating psychosis. So let me tell you a narrative of this. Mr. B, a 32-year-old single man born and raised in Dominican Republic with a religion background of evangelical Christian, has some college education, speaks fluent Spanish, some English, immigrated to the USA 7 years ago, which basically was the first time being exposed to the English language fully. I mean, we're not talking about movies or going to McDonald's and say combo number one or playlist or common I will say now international English language. And he had a work history, some part-time jobs in and out. Very typical description of a case. So what happened? So he started experiencing some symptoms. He was feeling irritable, disoriented, sad, confused, and wanted to be alone. When we talked about this at the beginning, they said, why this happened to you? It's like, well, I'm from Dominican Republic and I need to survive the US. I need to get a lot of money. So I'm working a lot. So I'm pretty sure it's the result of working too many hours. It can make sense. I mean, burnout is legit. Being exhausted is legit. And working in a kitchen or working in tough places, that comes with irritability, disorientation, and sad and confused. Why not, right? So it's not a wrong diagnosis. 5 months later, he sought psychiatric care in a community hospital for the first time, and he reported that, and he was diagnosed with major depression and treated with fluoxetine, typical standard treatment. The second encounter was the second evaluation. He was now 29 years old, and the symptoms, he had now difficulty in concentration. He started hearing the voices, self-dialoguing, self-isolation, and experienced psychotic episode. So, and I've been saying this a lot, and I think I will say it again. Having a mental illness in general, whether you call it anxiety, whether you call it burnout, you call it depression or psychosis, it's not intuitive. Nobody teaches in elementary, high school, during Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas. Oh, if you have a mental health illness, you should do this. It's not intuitive. Now imagine hearing voices. Imagine having problems with concentration. That's even worse. So Mr. B was then sent for a crisis. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks, diagnosed with schizophrenia, and treated with risperidone, valproic, and acid, which basically are antipsychotics. Now, the cool thing about this case is that they said, you know what? They sent it to me. I think I'm fluent in English and Spanish. I have a pretty good experience in multiple countries in Latin America and different states in the United States, treating Latinos. And when I saw Mr. B, I asked him, hey, he's from Dominican Republic. He must speak Spanish. I will offer that. So, Mr. B, you want English or Spanish? And he said English. And I was shocked. To be honest, I was almost offended. It's like, Mr. B, I'm one of the few therapists who speak Spanish in this hospital. Probably no more than 20 or 35 in the Massachusetts area. Are you sure you wanna speak English? Yeah. I said, okay, I will follow my client, sure. But in the back of my mind, I was like, there's something going on. But I gave it the benefit of the doubt. I tried to be as neutral as possible and say, well, let's do some English speaking therapy. Again, this is completely out of my comfort zone, because for me, of course, I would prefer Spanish over English. I'm more fluent. I have different jokes in Spanish than English, and that was my opportunity to connect with a patient in their own language. So he says no. Okay. He deliberately, as I said, chose English. He showed limited English proficiency, errors in syntax, tense, and limited vocabulary to be his primary language during treatment. And I can relate to that. You probably can see that sometimes I have some errors in my syntax too. But I can do broken English, presentation as well as broken English therapy. So I can relate to that. But after 20 sessions, for the first time, Mr. B switched from broken English to speaking Spanish. And I was again shocked. When he switched to Spanish, his speech rate was faster, the tone changed, the content became more disorganized, and he was more guarded. He even looked at me and said, I know you're after me, and I have to leave the office. And I was completely silent. We were doing interpersonal therapy at that time. The facial expressions changed from relaxed to frustrated. Mood changed from euphemic to labile, and rapidly expressed more psychotic symptoms such as visual and auditory hallucinations, as well as organized thoughts. So I was in my office. He was in the chair designated for him, and he said, "Don't move, Doctor S. There is a bird that is watching our conversation and is recording the conversation, and I didn't see anything. I didn't want to confront anything. I just was observant and tried to contain the symptoms. Again, he was completely talking to me in Spanish. I gave him a moment. He took a break. He went to the bathroom, and he came back. And when he came back, the psychotic symptoms were resolved. And for those of you who have experience working in crisis with psychosis, you see that the emotions, the thoughts completely go from 0 to 100 in seconds, and and it's something that you have to pay attention. When he came back, he was smiling again. I would call it a more clinical stability, and he switched back to English. This was shocking to me. And before I make a comment about it, I want to hear you guys. Why this happened? Why someone whose primary language is Spanish refused to speak Spanish with a clinician? Any comments? Why he will pick English? Guys, anyone? Your best guess.
Yeah, and Luis, along those lines, people were just commenting. So why is it that switching back to English impacted his psychotic symptoms resolving, and why he became agitated while receiving treatment in Spanish?
Mhm.
But I'd like to pose that also back to attendees. What are thoughts about that?
Mhm.
Can I share an idea?
Please, Elizabeth.
So I'm thinking that when you switch to your non-native language, you have to be more deliberate. There's more thinking involved. And so things will automatically be more slowed down because of that deliberation. It also makes me think of a study that was done with people who had Tourette syndrome. And when they traveled to countries where they spoke other languages, their tics went away because this was like a social anxiety. So I'm wondering if it's sort of related in terms of like the brain processes that are occurring. And back in his native language, this is, that's who he is. It's the language is a piece of his identity, and that is where the mental health lies.
Okay. So, great observation. There is a key component here. His primary language is Spanish, and he was basically learning English for the past 7 years. So, second language is now not necessarily in the same language component that is located in the brain as you're bilingual since born. So it's located in a different part of the brain that definitely triggers more memory. And as you said, Elizabeth, this is more an effort. Let's see the result. Yeah. So, and I want to just focus on the last part. So when I asked that question, because I was completely shocked myself, and he says, I know my English language number 2 is not perfect. So it takes me an extra effort to think about the things that I want to say to my clinicians. And even though what I say does not match what I feel, when I do that, I feel I can control more my thoughts And in this case, this also helps me to feel less emotions. It's like I can encapsulate the psychosis with my broken English, but that doesn't happen when I speak Spanish. When I speak Spanish, my thoughts are more fluid and are harder to stop. I feel more foggy and my emotions feel more intense. Amazing. I never thought about that too. And the stereotype is Dominican Republic, Spanish speaking, a little bit of culturated. I can see the English is not his forte. Let's do, I'm sorry? Oh, I can see that the English is not his forte. Let's provide Spanish. Why not? And boom, it completely changed the game. English language was disguising the symptoms of psychosis. So probably what experienced back then, when he was diagnosed with major depression, he was making the effort in his rudimentary vocabulary or poor vocabulary back then, just to express almost like the gist. And based on the gist, it was diagnosed correctly. But once he was switched to Spanish, man, it was the accurate symptoms were right there. And going back to help them to encapsulate psychosis, I think that was a beautiful, beautiful, intuitive mechanism for Mr. B to try to control the psychosis. And to be honest, I have been able now to see this phenomena more often and say, I understand this part. Can you talk to me in a different language or in your own dialect and see what changes? And it changes. The people tend to encapsulate more things sometimes, and the affect is there, and then you can go back and forth. So again, don't encapsulate yourself to only providing English or Spanish for someone who wants to switch languages. Try to go with the flow and try to make the best of it. I have more questions. Yeah, he was guarded, of course. Yes, but this is the other part that I also learned from him. So he was with me, let's say, for 50 minutes. He was talking English. He put a lot of effort. As I said, he was alone. He has a cell phone. So he was able to encapsulate emotions. He was able to be defensive. It's fine. Guarded. It's not a bad thing sometimes. But once he finished the session, he want to talk to his mom. He want to talk to his dad. He want to talk to his friends in Dominican Republic. So he will talk to them in Spanish. And once he switched to Spanish, then again, all the symptoms and all the almost like the blockage or the forte that was around that can definitely, break that and then, show other symptoms. But we won't be able to see that unless we explore that, because when he goes back to the hospital, then we'll see a more encapsulated, more structured person in this. So just pay attention to it. The other one is called the status quo versus a context base. Mr. H.
Hey, Luis,
yes.
Can I jump in? Just
Please.
a quick question that somebody asked, which I'm curious about as well. So if you met another client with a similar background, would you still offer them the option for English?
Absolutely. Yeah. Remember, the patient is the one who brings the agenda. Yeah. Unless you see something that is, in safety things, then you will try to go after the crisis. But if the patient wants to speak 10 minutes Spanish and then the other 5, Creole and the other one English, sure. If you're capable to do that, why not? It's a very difficult, because unless you're fluent in these 3 languages, or at least able to explore with your own language things, like what do you mean, or why do you switch, or what does that mean, or how to translate, I will encourage them. Why not? Actually, if I go to my supervisor, if I go to one of my clinicians, and if I want to say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, can I switch to Spanish? And the clinician says, like, sure, why not? It will be an amazing experience for me, even more empathetic, more sympathetic in my experience. And if I want to switch to another language at the end, because I'm more, used to say particular expressions in English, And if he or she falls alone, that would be a fantastic therapeutic approach.
Great
Right.
points, Luis.
Thank you for the questions, great questions. The status quo versus context-based. I think you will see this one quite often in most of the settings. So this is a Mr. H, he's a demographic, 30 years old, married, man, born and raised in the jungle of Nicaragua, religion Catholic, completed second grade, speaks only Spanish, immigrated to the United States 15 years ago, work history between 60 to 70 hours in construction. So what happens? Mr. H was working in construction for 10, 15 hours a day. There's no psychiatric history or major problems. He drinks between 5 to 6 beers during the weekend after work. I mean, who wouldn't after so many hours in construction? Really hard labor, intensive labor. So he came back home. He was exhausted. He was starving. He told his roommates, you know, I hear some noises outside of the apartment. Could you please call the police or 911? The roommates called 911. He was making his dinner. He was flipping and stirring his meal with a chef knives. And for those who are familiar with tortillas and you have a gas stove and you're in a hurry, it's very common to grab whatever utensil is in front of you to flip the tortilla. It can be a spoon, a fork, a knife, the hand, a pen, it doesn't matter. It's very, very common. So he was, using the chef knife. When the police came to the house, the police saw him with a knife. The police asked him questions in English. He could not respond. He became nervous, agitated. After a few minutes, he was arrested. Did that resonate to you guys? Do you think it's a common episode, a common situation? So what happened here? Let me ask you a couple of questions. Could you please pull the questions, please? Based on the following symptoms that Mr. H reported, and this is back in the police station: headache, confused, hypervigilant, suspicious, anxious, sweating. What will be the good preliminary diagnosis? Don't be shy, guys. We all make mistakes. We all have assumptions. Right, wrong, it doesn't matter. This is a teaching experience. Let's go to 80. Come on. Have a B at least. Not enough information, none of the above. B, psychotic disorder, NOS. Great. Okay, 60, 65. And just for the sake of the timing, I will go. I won't say the answer yet. We have a brief psychotic episode as the potential winner. A schizophrenic form, good. We haven't seen any mood component there. Schizophrenia, I wonder why you rule out schizophrenia immediately, and psychosis due to substance misuse, that's a second contender. Okay, I believe we have another question after that one. Can we put the other question, Vanessa, please? Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, that's not the one. Let's take that one. I believe I have one. Just take it out. Well, let me tell you what happened later. The day of his first encounter with a psychiatric facility, Mr. H had the intake. Psychiatric evaluation was with a monolingual English-Spanish clinician and a bilingual interpreter. The patient was monolingual Spanish speaking, presented disoriented, headaches, confused, hypervigilant, suspicious, another headache, why not, and anxiety. Mr. B was evaluated in court to determine his mental stability and criminality. Due to his symptoms, he was declared incompetent to stand a trial and diagnosed with psychosis. He was sent to an inpatient unit for examination and observation. He was treated with Haldol, Seroquel, and Cogentin. Again, these are two out of the two antipsychotic medication, and Cogentin is just to reduce some of the side effects. This is a very typical situation. Monolingual English speaking, bilingual interpreter, and here he was completely anxious, but the anxiety and other stuff didn't come because of the symptoms. It's because he was arrested, and yet he was disoriented. Never experienced not only a potential psychiatric component, but to be arrested, to be interrogated, and having someone translating this. That was more than enough to feel confused, hypervigilant, suspicious, anxious. The only component that is like, something might be going on will be the disorientation plus the hypervigilant at the same time. So he was treated with an antipsychotic. But then what happened? 90 days later, I was able to be part of the team. And now this time we have a monolingual Spanish-speaking psychiatrist, monolingual case manager, monolingual Spanish-speaking nurse, bilingual psychologist, bilingual interpreter, and monolingual Spanish-speaking patient. At the end of the clinical interview, patient continued treatment for psychosis. A neuropsychological evaluation provided an IQ of 1.7 standard deviations below the mean. Let me clarify this. I was part of the evaluation, and I purposely did not say anything. I wanted to see the interaction of the monolingual Spanish with the bilingual and the monolingual Spanish-speaking client. I also was part observant deliberately how was the neuropsychological evaluation, and I was shocked that the results, provide a 1.7 standard deviation below the means. 1.7 is a lot. That means someone with a very limited intellectual capacity. That didn't make sense. So what happened next? So the challenge was that I said to the team, guys, I speak Spanish. What if let me do the evaluation, and then I will have different results to you. I found that the 13 hours that he was working in construction, he was working with a lot of solvents. He was working, with glues and a lot of chemical. So the headache and the disorientation might be explained to that. Then, and the suspicion is it has nothing to do with psychosis. It has more to do with the substances or the inhalants. The hypervigilance, he was not a legal resident. So being in front of a police where they can ask you questions where they don't know, it's always anxiety provoking. I challenged the neuropsychological evaluation, and I basically said to the clinician, how is that possible that someone who immigrated as an adult and survived the immigration process and has been living and supporting himself for the past 10 years, or 15 years, how is that possible that has such a low IQ and such a low cognitive components? That doesn't make any sense. What I found is that the neuropsychologists use, some of the available tests that they have in this particular site that were outdated, that were not even remotely updated or accurate to the population. And something that you will hear a lot is, yes, we did evaluation in English and the patient is in Spanish, and we are cautious about this. Sure, I think that's the minimum that you can say, but putting a label of 1.7 standard deviations below the mean, that's a lot. Because when you share that with another clinicians and they see these reports when you have a limited mental capacity, the tendency is to treat them as they have a low cognition and low capacity. And instead of providing psychotherapy and going after what's going on, or even CBT for psychosis, they will be more like a symptom management and basically very condescending, very patronizing way of treating these patients. And then again, I challenged the interpreter and I said, could you please translate this into English and could you please translate this back into Spanish? And I found that the translation was pretty poorly, even though I know they have, they need to have some certification, some license, some training. Again, it's not a given. It's not a given. At one point, I was able to see that the interpreter didn't know the difference between what a court, a judge and a jury, a lawyer and a defendant. And when you have that kind of translation, it really fits into the description of the typical low SES, low educated Hispanic, and then you just go to the status quo. Yeah, give more medication, give more this, and that's it. So after I present my evidence and I present what was happening, the patient was discharged with a diagnosis of psychosis due to intoxication and left the inpatient unit with a prescription of Tylenol. Can you see the difference between giving a Haldol, an antipsychotic, versus just a simple headache? It's huge. It's huge. The patient was very grateful, not only because he was able to finally say, I think I need to use more protection when I'm doing the construction, but he was not an inpatient anymore. He was not treated as a psychotic person. And that was a life-changing for him. And to be honest, I think that was a very challenging case because I confronted my team. They never saw that coming because they're not used to someone with these skills to do this and that. And I think we were very lucky to have it that day. And I would say, provide a different outcome for this particular patient. Holy powers and psychiatric illness. I know we're running out of time. I will try to do very, very quickly. 27-year-old single woman born and raised in Boston with Caribbean roots, living with parents and some extended family, Catholic, some college education, speaks fluent English and Spanish. This is a bilingual. Work history, unemployed for the past 5 years. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 22, treated with clozapine. It's one of the oldest antipsychotic. Individual psychotherapy sessions once every 2 weeks, 30 minutes, psychiatric consultation once every 2 weeks. This is a very standard. Current symptoms, auditory and visual hallucinations, social isolation, low self-esteem, overweight, and depression. But the component that is very, very unique here, and you will see quite often, is the cultural component about the perception of schizophrenia or a major psychiatric disorder. So Ms. Devine got a flyer to join a Pentecostal church. Ms. Devine disclosed her auditory and visual hallucinations with the pastor, and boom, she was treated as one of the chosen one. Her hallucinations were seen as a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. She felt special and welcome, and that created a huge dilemma for her, basically saying, Luis, if I don't take my meds, I have the energy, I have the voices, I can, say whatever comes to me. I can, share the visual and the auditory hallucinations. I'm welcome. People treat me, they want my advice. But if I don't take it, if I take the medication, I feel lethargic, I'm gaining weight, and I feel alone. What's the point? What should I do? And that was a huge, huge problem for Ms. Devine, because she really wanted to have the social connections of this particular church, because without the church, she was just left alone. She was reminded every single day about her diagnosis, about her treatment, and that's something that you have to really, really think about. This particular, with these cultural backgrounds, what would be the middle ground? what we start doing with her, and we also involve the family, was provide the psychoeducation. And I think one of the first things that we said about psychosis and psychoeducation, psychoeducation is not your fault. It's a brain disorder. It's a lot of electricity and chemicals going on all over the place. It's not because God is punishing you or punishing your dad or mom because they cheated on each other, or because they were drinking, or because you were not wanted. There's a lot of guilt there. Then we went to understanding her conflict and the dilemma about, medication brings this, but then you have the energy, versus no medication, you have all the energy and the social support. What will be in the middle? And after, support her own values. Very quickly, Arma versus Alma, and I'm sorry for my poor pronunciation or my interpretation of the Puerto Rican accent, but in Mexico we have the R sound like R. In some regions of Puerto Rico, the R sounds like an L. So alma and alma, it sounds pretty similar. But what is the difference between arma and alma? For those who don't know Spanish, I will tell you. This is a completely dialogue in Spanish. So if you know that, you will have access to this presentation later. Basically, the patient is crying and feeling desperate and says to me, I feel really bad. Sometimes I think that the only solution to reduce this pain is to heal to heal my alma or arma. And I was like, what do you mean? And keeps crying more intensively. He grabs his head and chest. It's like, yes, my arm, my alma. And I said, Mr. G, I know what you're passing through. I know it's very difficult, but can you use the word in a different context? This is almost like a spelling bee, right? 101. And I was just trying to really, one, don't assume anything, and two, to try to get more information in his own context. Says, can you repeat that? And he's like, sure. So I asked, like, where did you buy your arma? Or where do you have your arma? Just by buying, says, I bought it in the gun store, I'll be able to say this. And if you, where do you have it? He says, the drawer in my closet. At least I will try to locate two of the things that I was thinking. And then he says, are you Catholic? Says, sure. Why the question? Is like, well, because you know that everybody is born with an alma that God gives to us, and you cannot buy this. That was for me the key component to definitely make a differentiation between a risk factor. Arma with an R means a gun, access to weapons. And again, he said, I have this pain, and I think the only solution for me to reduce the pain is to use my arma, my gun. That's a red flag. Versus alma with an L is the soul, religion, and that's a protective factor. That was another teaching experience for me to say, whoa. Even though we both speak Spanish, and I have been in Puerto Rico, and I have lived in Puerto Rico, and I'm kind of familiar, I couldn't have the right diagnosis right away, or even the right interpretation. If I go with what I thought, with my assumption of the language, I would put that person in a risk. The what? I'm sorry. Someone said something? Well, okay, I will try to address that. So I think the bottom line is, don't be afraid to keep asking questions and take your time. Facts and challenges about our current workforce, as you know, and I have two pool questions that let's try to answer as quickly as possible. Can you help me to put the questions, please? According to the APA, what is the approximate percentage of the psychologists that can provide services in Spanish? Okay, 75%. Come on, guys. We're almost done. 2% versus 5%. That's a good one. All right, good, that's good answers. Good answers. Great. Now, Vanessa, can you help me to put the other question? So 5% is the correct answer. Good for you guys. Now, according to the APA, how many psychologists reported being quite or extremely knowledgeable about working with Hispanic patients? And I will, I even will challenge that not only psychologists, but if you ask social workers, mental health providers, psychiatrists, you name it, you name it. All right. 1.5% of the APA psychology will say quite extremely knowledgeable, 10%. For those who put 1.5, kudos. I think you are answering the question wrong, but you're very humble, and I appreciate that. Let me tell you, let's go to the presentation. I was shocked with this information myself too. Only 5.5% of psychologists can administer mental health care service in Spanish, and 44.9% of psychologists said they were quite extremely knowledgeable about working with Hispanic patients. I'm completely shocked about this, and I will love to talk to those psychologists and ask them, what do you do? What's your background? How do you have the training? What are you doing? Because this is phenomenal. I personally think that this is more about confidence more than accuracy, but this is something for you to reflect and think about it, and definitely challenge the numbers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, current behavioral health workforce is insufficient to meet the healthcare. But hey, we're insufficient, but we have a good self-esteem that we can do this. The next presentation, yes, the majority of the workforce in terms of race and ethnicity is definitely white. Only 70% of Hispanic, African American, 4%, Asian, and others are 2%. And this is something that hopefully we need to change soon. If we have these numbers in the ethnicity workforce, is because we have these or even lower numbers of minority getting into master's degree or PhD degrees and have the certification to do this. I think the Hispanic population is very well educated. There are plenty people who can do this, but there is also a systematic discrimination process to get access to higher education and also to this level of education and training. Look, ability to provide psychological service in another language other than English. In Spanish, only 231 people. That's nothing. That's nothing. Imagine just 235 people in Los Angeles. That's not even enough for one county. So lack of linguistic and cultural competence. Patients who don't speak the same language as their providers report worse outcomes and higher dropout rates. And it makes sense. It makes sense. Spanish-speaking clients often feel less comfy sharing personal information with an English-Hispanic therapist, even when an interpreter is used. And I think even though, like the example of Mr. H, even though he was with an interpreter and they're not fully aware of the full sentences, they know, they feel that the interpretation is not quite accurate, but they're also shy to confront the interpreter because they saw that as an authority, or they believe and trust too much the healthcare system to make the right decisions. As I said, Spanish-speaking clients also may benefit from switching from English to Spanish when recurring to emotional experience. This is not an experiment, be careful, but try to use it more often. You will see how the patient will navigate, and also it will help the patient to navigate the system and their emotions in a different way. I think that's a powerful tool. Spanish-speaking Americans across the US say they have a hard time finding mental health care services in the other native. So this is my assumption, right? It's like, I have a Dominican Republic guy. He wants to speak Spanish. He found me, and boom, it was a different story. Now, this is a very common and problematic, and I don't think we will have the time to go over. I think we even are over a little bit with a presentation, but be careful with this formula. Patient is monolingual Spanish. You have a bilingual therapist, grad school, or one of those, few cases that they can speak different language, but then you have a supervisor who is monolingual English. This formula is quite problematic because the bilingual patient not only is interpreting and doing this, but it's also educating the supervisor, and the communication, it can be so complicated and so messy that at the end, the patient is the one who is paying the broken dishes. So we have to do a lot of training in this particular part of the formula, bilingual therapist versus supervisor. How can we create a different approach to provide better services to the monolingual Spanish patient? The solutions very quickly, and this happens a lot, being bilingual is not the same as being bicultural. Not because you speak two different languages, that means you understand two cultures. Being bilingual doesn't mean that you can do therapy in both languages. You can speak both languages very well, but that doesn't mean that you are proficient to do the therapy. And this is one of my favorite, and has happened to me all the time, because I'm a bilingual and bicultural. Other senior clinicians, because they need to see these patients, they said, "Oh, I'm pretty sure you can treat people from China or Portugal or France." No, I'm sorry. I'm sometimes I'm able to do both. Some of the Spanish-speaking countries, but other cultures, that's not. And if you're in those rare conditions, try to be firm and tell to the supervisor, "I'm sorry, I can't. That's not my area of expertise. I don't have anything in common. I have curiosity, and I'm happy to do whatever the best of my abilities, but that doesn't mean I can understand more cultures or more languages." So cultural competence break the tendency to treat aggregated groups. Don't impose predominant therapeutic models. Not because you only speak one language, you're more proficient in one. You have to implement that, and be brave enough to modify the treatment modalities and things for your patients. Possible solutions to appropriately assess and treat Latinos. Again, cultural and linguistically competent means assessing patients' level of adaptation to this new culture, help him or her to define or redefine their own experience. Family, being a man, being an immigrant, what does that mean? Explore patients' cultural meaning. Back home, how did you feel back then? What happened back then? Have you experienced things back then in comparison to the US? And one of the most amazing things is using common sense. I remember in one conference given in the South, says, I have a patient, and the patient says that, is eating 2 pounds of tortillas every day. Is that culture? Is that part of Mexico? I think eating even 2 pounds of lettuce doesn't make any sense, even less tortillas. So don't be afraid to use your common sense. And if you're hesitant, ask them and say, "Okay, you eat 2 pounds of tortillas, but what about your little brother? What about when you were, 10 years old? What about your grandma?" And you will see the differences right there. So I will encourage you to use common sense. And finally, I think one of the solutions is not the demographics and economic profiles of Hispanics in your state. So for example, I'm in Massachusetts, and I know that there's at least 700,000 Hispanic living in my state. And these are, the numbers. So I encourage you to have that because you can create a different network, a professional network. You can, see what's going on. For example, in Massachusetts, there are not two Mexicans living in Massachusetts, but there are a lot of people from El Salvador and Brazilian. So I will be a great asset for people who speak Spanish from Guatemala, El Salvador, Chileans, Argentinians, but I'm completely useless for someone from Latin America who speaks Spanish, like the Portuguese community or the Brazilian community. So it's like a completely different approach to me and you for me. Without further ado, and I'm sorry that I took a lot of time, and any questions, and thank you.
Well, Dr. Sandoval, I just want to say what an incredibly rich, helpful, and informative and engaging presentation this was. So just really appreciative for you doing this presentation today. And there were so many different comments that came through on the chat, as well as questions. And I know we're over time and we can't address everything. But there was one theme that came across a few questions already, which I'm wondering if maybe you could just quickly comment on. And I'll remind everyone that this recording is going to be available on the website too. So if you have to sign off, you can always watch the recording later. But the one question I was hoping, again, you can quickly address, is if for suggestions for providers who are dependent on interpreters, how we would know if the translations are incorrect and a disservice to the patient. So as a provider relying on interpretation services, somebody said there are times that she questions the quality of the interpretation, and there's no way to question the validity of the translation. So just suggestions for providers who rely on interpretation services.
I will provide different answers. The simple answer is very challenging. So we have to work with what we have. The second one is, as the interpreter, usually the interpreter meet with a clinician a couple of minutes before the patient. As interpreter, what is your experience translating psychosis? What is your experience translating people from Guatemala? Let's say the person is from Puerto Rico. Like, what is your experience translating people from Guatemala, from Mexico? Which language? I know you're a translator. Which language? It's more fun, or it's easy for you to translate or to relate. And even though they say, "Oh no, Spanish," you'll be surprised. I have seen people who were born in their native language, they're proficient in English, that they're more used to speaking English than Spanish. And I have seen the opposite. People who were born in Ireland, completely fluent in Spanish because they love Spain, and they are fantastic interpreters in the Spanish culture. If you want to be more picky, but again, we want to create alliances, not a conflict. Try to go to Google Translate a paragraph, get familiar, and then say to the interpreter, "Can you translate that to me?" Back and forth. And if that's kind of consistent, you will say that at least 80-70% is there. But again, when we're doing with psychosis and things like that, that 20% is the difference between Tylenol or antipsychotic. But that's what we have. I think we need to create a good alliance with interpreters. And the other part, which I think might be a little bit off, but I at least I like to be aware of it. Some of the interpreters, they're good. They're passionate. They help a lot. But they're so passionate, they help a lot, that they get involved with the life story of the patient. And they might be shaking at the same time they're translating, or I'm not translating, interpreting depends, interpreter or translating the event. Imagine an interpreter, doing clinical work for 5 hours when they said, I was raped and my father, abused me. They're humans too. And you will see them like shaking. You will see the fluency in the translation a little bit chippy or choppy. And I think it's because there's something going on there too. Again, we're not interpreting the interpreters, but we're just saying this is having problems with the translation. And don't be afraid of asking the same question 2 different ways. You can see if the interpreter was able to say the same phrase or do it in a different way. Bring more questions to different contexts, bring more context with different questions. That will definitely help you a lot with navigating monolingual clinician with bilingual interpreter and monolingual Spanish speaking.
Wonderful suggestions. Thank you so much. And I'll just say that there are so many comments about what a fantastic presentation this was, and calls for you to come back and teach us some more, which I hope you will consider doing at some point in the future.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank
But
you.
Raquel, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for playing along with the questions, with the jokes, with my poor syntax sometimes. I hope this presentation was helpful. And if you have more questions, please contact Raquel, contact me. I'm happy to help in any capacity. Thanks so much, guys.
For
Have a
making
good
yourself
one.
available. And Rachel, I know we just have brief closing remarks for the MHETC.
Yep, thank you all for attending today's webinar, and you'll be receiving an evaluation form right afterwards.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.